What's up, horror fans? Pete here, and I'm with my co-host, Mr. Danny, Dr. Zayas God. Danny, how you doing today?
Very good. Very excited.
Yes. And Danny and I are super excited because we have a special guest today. We have Mr. Michael Moreci, who is a comic book writer, a novelist, and also a screenwriter. As far as comics go, he's written Roche Limit. Am I pronouncing that right?
Nailed it. Yeah.
Nailed it. Okay, cool. Someone said Roche Limit in like an interview, and I was like, is that right?
I think that's the chocolate. I think that's the.
All right, so I got it right. Then there's Barbaric, which I got right here. This is an awesome friggin' book. Speaking of his novels, he's got Black Star Renegades, and then its sequel, We Are Mayhem. And then, last but not least, one of the big focuses of our interview today, we are going to be talking about the movie Revealer, which he co-wrote, which is on Shudder right now. Just premiered on Shudder recently. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I when you say all this stuff, it's like, damn, that now I realize why I'm so busy. I have no free time.
right. And you're like us, right? Like you have I think 2 kids you said in one of your interviews, and
I do.
Yes.
10 and 2 boys, 10 and 7. I coach multiple teams as well. So
nice.
I stay in the thick, man. I'm like a shark. I think if I stop moving, I die. I'm pretty sure.
Right. Cool. Yeah. Well, I have an 11-year-old.
I saw that mug. One of my favorite movies of all time, man. I mean, whose is it not, right?
Right.
I just rewatched it for the 4th of July for about the 1,000th time. So
Me too. It's tradition.
Yes.
We are super excited about talking about Revealer, and I figure we jump into there. But Danny usually has this one question he likes to pop to our guests every time.
It's like my generic interview opener. It's kind of become like our dare I say like our cliche opener at this point. But to the point where Pete will be like, "So you're going to ask your question to start, right?" I'm like, "Yes, all right, fine." No, but we're a horror channel, and my generic question is, I'm always interested in what got you or whoever we're talking to, what got you into horror, and specifically as a writer, like where were your horror influences from writing? And yeah, so that's my generic opener.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it's an important one. I think it's like everybody has like their different way in terms of being a fan or being a writer or being anything. Like how do you kind of take it for granted when you're in it, as we are like deep in, horror, like you take for granted like that not everybody gets to it. And I think you have to get it, whether it's horror or sci-fi or even like baseball or whatever, you have to get it at the right time. And it has to be like kind of cultivated within you, and you just grow with this thing, or just accelerated love that grows for this thing. So it's always interesting, at least for me, to hear like, well, how did this start? How did it develop and grow? And for me, so I was lucky. Like I grew up. My mom it was both my parents were very liberal. This is the 80s. Latchkey kids stuff. The 80s parenting was, we were just talking about how we all have kids. Parenting was very different in the 80s. I miss it. But my parents let me watch anything, and I have an older brother who's really into horror. And so I have a distinct memory, first of all, seeing the first Friday the 13th. I was probably 5, maybe 4, something like that. My brother watching, and I was behind the couch and watched Friday the 13th, like just hidden watching it. And then eventually it was just became the norm because he watched all this horror in the house. And when in the 80s, as you guys know, like when somebody's watching something in the house, that's what you're watching. Like there wasn't, nobody's going using their phone or pad or whatever. It's like, no, there's one VHS or beta. You probably rented it. The whole machine. So like, and you get a bunch of stuff for the weekend. That's what you watch. So like my parents were into that as well. So I remember seeing, like I said, the Friday 13th very young, but that was like kind of hidden in snippets and stuff like that. But the first full on horror I ever watched was Halloween, the original, a movie that my parents love. it's top 3 horror movies for me. And that really started my path. Like I was a kid who, while I do it like I still love sports and I'm athletic and I'm involved my like I said, my kids' athletics, like I still like spent a lot of time at home as a kid, you know, like
Mhm.
and while I was involved with sports, like I didn't have still a lot of friends. Like I was involved, I wasn't like part of the sports clique. So I was
Mhm.
still spending a lot of time at home, and time is occupied by just a ton of movies. My dad still to this day, loves dubbing shit. He just can't get enough of like recording VHSs, like and he transfers now, God love him. He transfers VHS to DVD, and he's like, "You want this DVD?" I'm like, "No, it still just looks like a VHS. It doesn't magically like transfer the quality. Like it's still just a shitty DVD
Does he
VHS."
has the machine where like where it's the 2-in-1 VHS DVD?
He must. I don't know exactly the technology or lack thereof that he's working with, but like, yeah, he is just recording stuff constantly. That's how I was when he was a kid. I still in my basement have a box, you know, full of betas, and betas at the time would be like 8-hour tape, like the beta. I forgot what it was called. And there'd be like we'd have 3 to 4 movies on every tape, where it's recorded from TV or other betas or whatever. So we just had like library of movies, many of them horror. So I was able to be like, you know, who's this John Carpenter guy? What
Right.
else can I watch? He's one of my favorites. And my dad, I mean, I watched with my dad, you know, Escape from New York. We watched with Romero Night, all the Living Dead trilogy, because that's all that was out at the time. Watched
Right.
that trilogy. Watched the Nightmare on Elm Streets, you know, like with my brother, but with my dad, like exposed me to like really great stuff. And it wasn't like he was like how we are now, like he didn't tell me everything about Romero or the film, the story and stuff. He just liked these movies, you know, and had them and enjoyed them. So he wanted to watch them with somebody. My brother was very like popular and had friends and stuff like that, and he was gone. So he'd be like, "Well, you're here, you know, you're
Right.
7. It doesn't matter. Let me tell you about this Land of the, or not Land of the Dead, but Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead." And I just loved it. I loved it. I loved these movies. I loved spending time with my dad. I loved everything about it. And I just kept going down that wormhole. And as this time is happening, you're getting later into the 80s, video stores are becoming more accessible. You can go to a Blockbuster and find stuff where before it was just far more difficult. When 80, 85, 86, it's so much more difficult to find stuff. The accessibility is just not there. But by like time 9 or 10,
Mm.
you can get movies a lot easier. And that's, as that access is growing, so is my love for movies is growing. So and especially horror, so I'm just able to get everything, and I just devoured and devoured and devoured and never stop. I still don't to this day.
Yeah. Well, you know, it must be so exciting then for you to have your movie be on Shutter, which in a lot of ways is like the horror section of a rental store. And you know, I've looked at a lot of your work. You know, I've known about you since before Revealer, and I've read some of your books, and they're from all different genres. So it's interesting to see that like your very first movie that's come out is a horror movie. And so I was wondering, is this like opening up doors for you? Like, are you going to make more horror movies now because Revealer has come out and been a hit?
You know, I hope so. You know, I mean, this is like really, and I say this with caution because I want to be careful how I say it, but like as much, I love comics and I love working comics, and I'm so grateful for that. And I have no intention to stop. I'm going to write Barbaric for 100 issues if I can. And I think, you know, knock on wood, the series does well, and I think we can.
Yeah.
But like movies are my first love. You know, I had movies before I had comics. I had a special relationship with movies because of my family, because of my just time alone. Comics did come later, and I just grew up on film. And I actually went to film school, and I made my own short films when I was younger, and they just didn't go anywhere. And I just,
Mhm.
that's a long story of why I left film. And it's uh, on one hand, it's a really big regret. On the other hand, I'm like, well, I think I'm in better position now, you know, 20 years later than I was then to handle this and know what to do and be better at what I do. But yeah, I mean, the goal is like to do more horror. I joined Shatterglass Films, which who produced it. I'm a partner there now with Luke Boyce, who directed it. There's other people involved as well, but Luke and I are really good friends, and yeah, we have a lot of ambitions, and a lot of it's all like horror stuff. I mean, on one hand, it's like horror is what you can do, because horror is a cheaper genre. You can do it for less, like it's just there's much more capabilities there. But also I kind of love that because I grew up mid to low middle class, everyman kind of background, and so like horror I feel like is the middle class genre. I really believe that, so I think it's also just part of my DNA. So I think you never know what the future brings. I think like you look at someone who I love, like Scott Derrickson, and he did Day the Earth Stood Still, and he did Doctor Strange, but
right.
I feel like his backbone of who he is, similar to me, even with comics, the backbone of what I do is, I feel like, is horror. And then I kind of like, yeah, I'll do barbaric, or I'll do Roche Limit, but like really it's like what I feel like I'm most comfortable with is like the plot, or Stranger Things, or hack slash and stuff like that.
To get into Revealer, we watched it, Pete and I, we each watched it the other day, really enjoyed it. It felt like almost like it was like this could have been almost like a stage play in a way, because it's basically two main characters in a tight confined space for much of the movie. Now you wrote this with another person, Tim Seeley, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so when you're writing a movie like this, what's that process like? Do you each just latch onto one of these two characters and say, okay, I'm gonna be the woman who works in the stripper, or the woman who's in the sex booth, and I'm gonna be Sally, the super religious woman outside protesting? How do you collaborate on a script like this?
Well, Tim is definitely the stripper, for sure. No. So Tim and I have been friends for, over 10 years now. He's one of my best friends. We live 10 minutes away from each other. We see each other regularly. So we had a good relationship going in as friends, and we worked together a little bit. Like I mentioned, Hack Slash, which is one of his many great comic series, and I wrote that for quite a while. But the tricky thing though with Revealer is that the process of this moved at lightning speed. So to answer the question, I kind of got to like give a little bit of the context of, we started kicking around the idea to be able to do it. It started with the idea that we could do a movie before even an idea for a movie existed. So Luke came to Tim and I, and the producers that he works with, this was at the start of the pandemic. Let me say that first. Very important to point that out. This is like May of 2020. So we're still like, don't even know what's going on really. So we're early pandemic, and Luke's producing partner, Sarah Sharp, who's one of the greatest people around, came to Luke and said, like, we have to get people to work, like we got to figure this out. People are losing income, and people are scared, and we need to find a way to get people working. How do we make a movie? How do we make it small? How do we make it contained? How do we make it safe? And she knew a lot of this stuff, how to do it. She didn't have the content, but she's like, I know how to make it safe. I know how to do this, but we need the right movie to do in these conditions. So Luke came to Tim and I and was like, what do you think? Here's the conditions. Not a lot of, you can have like 2, maybe 3 actors. We can have 1+ location, and these kind of things expanded a little bit as you see in the movie. I think it's 2 full-on locations and a little bit outside. But he was like, utter confinement. What do you got? And we pitched some ideas. Revealer was the one that was chosen, and it took so well, to Sarah and her financial partners, that it was like go, and we were like off to the races to do this. So Tim and I wrote this, and this is like a Revealer started with him, and he came up with it specifically when we were asked. It's not like something he had in his back pocket or anything like that. So we went from like very loose kind of a story, not really, to writing a script. And when we got the green light to write it and everything, and we knew this was going to happen, we wrote it in 8 days.
Oh, wow.
Which, yeah, absolutely bonkers. I say never again, but I'm sure if it happened again, I would say yes. And there's a good chance, who knows, it will. For the thing with movies I learned is you never have enough time and you never have enough money. So if it was 10 days, if it was 20 days, it still would feel fast. But we just went fast, and I would write some when I had time, and I'd throw it to Tim, and he would write stuff back, and we'd work on each other's stuff, and we just kind of zipped through this thing as fast as we can, and with the means that we had. And it's a miracle. It's a sober script, like it's it still went through revisions. Even when we were filming, we were still revising. I was on set. Tim didn't go. He didn't feel comfortable going, which I understand. But I went on set, and I was even working on it then and still consulting with Tim. But it was fast, and we just our process was survival mode. Is like, whoever can do this, go do it, then pass it off. We were just kind of constantly passing the baton, and Luke was involved with that too, of helping shape the story just so we can get this done and get it in. And we were casting and filming, and we were off.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point in our interview too, we should probably tell people that there's going to be spoilers for Revealer, because some of our questions kind of could lead to spoilers. So if you guys haven't seen spoilers, if you haven't seen Revealer, go check it out on Shudder. I'm sure most of you guys have Shudder subscriptions. But I was going to say that, going along with what you're saying, because it totally makes sense that it was made like during COVID, and that like at the height of COVID, and like you can't even have that many people in the movie, right? But you have this sort of epic biblical story happening too. It's like the biblical apocalypse. And like, was that an idea of like, oh, hey, let's see how we can kind of do the biblical apocalypse through like the lens of like a very small kind of confined space? Because I know you have like the trumpets from like the angels playing the trumpets when the apocalypse is happening. Right. And then you have like Asmodeus, the demon, show up and stuff. Like, what was the idea behind all the biblical stuff?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Yeah, it was definitely what our aim was, because we're like, the first thing when we started this, we're like, we're not making a COVID. We're not making a movie about COVID. Like, none of us, like, and we see these movies now that's like, oh, this couple's trapped in an apartment in COVID, and this and COVID, and something with a disease and a virus. And we're like, no, thank you. It was like, we're barely even in it. And we're like, I don't even want to talk about this. If we're going to make a movie, that's the last thing I want to make a movie about. Right. But, Luke and I decided early on, and Tim too, but I think Luke and I shared this. Luke is a director. He's made short films. He's more invested, he was more invested in than me at the time, because I had kind of zigged over to comics. But we were both like, we've been wanting this opportunity our whole lives. So if we're going to do it, and we actually have money, and we actually have the means to do it, like, we're just going to swing for the fences. Like, I think one of the things I love most about Revealer is that it's an ambitious movie, despite the scale, despite the many restrictions we had. Like, we're trying to do stuff. We're trying to make a big story, big in theme and character and scope of an apocalypse, and the biblical stuff. Like, we're trying to make this movie as big as we can, and take the biggest swing that we can. And we stuck to that. And I think we never shied away, because people didn't want that. Like, at first they're like, well, we're never going to see it. We're never going to see an apocalypse. We have to see it outside, or we have to sort of, how do we convey that? And Luke, Tim, and I were like, no, that's the point. Like, yes, we're not going to see it. We can't. There's no way. And some reviews like, well, I wish we had seen it. It's like, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, I would too. Right. But we were about $3 million short, and one too many pandemics. Right. So we heard that not complaint from people who read the script, but warning, who were like, how can you pull this off if you don't see it? And we're like, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do this, and we're going to figure it out. And we did add some stuff. The trumpets, like you said, it was a good thing. We're like, how do we get this to intrude? And that came like a little bit later. And I forget where exactly in the process, but that was one of the things, just trying to creatively figure out like, okay, well, what can we do to convey what's happening outside without ever going outside or seeing outside or having the inside come in much
Right.
besides like the few glimpses that we get. And it was hard, but I think I'd rather have gone for it than not.
Yeah. It reminded me, we interviewed Max Booth III, and it reminded me, Pete, what is the name of the book We Need to Do Something, where it's a very confined movie that was made during the pandemic, but it has nothing to do with the pandemic. Like that, and I like that because I don't want to mention the name of the movie, but Pete and I were just talking about a movie I saw that is very heavily influenced by the pandemic, and I was like, oh no. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you, the movie is set in the 80s, in the very Reagan 1980s, but I couldn't help but feel that it is extremely topical to today, especially the interactions between these two characters, where again, where Pete gave the spoiler, the warning, but like one of these characters is very adamant about her choice to be what is effectively a sex worker, and the other character is a closet homosexual, and it just felt very topical that you have a woman who is very adamantly arguing for her choice and her body, and you have another woman who is struggling with her, sexual identity, and a lot of stuff is going on. I'm not trying to get very political with you, but I just wanted, like, were you and Tim aware how that would work? Releasing the film on Shudder, like it came out like 2 weeks ago, and every day it feels like there's something new. So like, do you think that was a part of the process, or
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's so weird because I'd like to say, because yes, all those political things that you mentioned, political and cultural and personal to these characters and people in the world, like were definitely part of our mind, like this rampant judgmental culture that we live in especially because of social media, because of this new rise of the Christian right. But when we wrote it, I'd like to say that we were prescient in some way, but it's just an unfortunate kind of accident, I guess, or coincidence, because like while we were hearkening back to like a time we knew of, like the 80s and Satanic Panic, and I think you guys are old enough to remember that, and what it was like, and like how there was this control of entertainment and control of books and control of what you could read, and Dungeons and Dragons and all this stuff's kind of in Stranger Things 4, weirdly, like this weird, stuff that they're tapping into as well. Tim and I never, while there was that kind of still I don't want to say Christianity, because I don't think it's Christianity specifically. I think it's a very nationalistic, far right Christianity that ascribes to these things that we're talking about that exist in Revealer and exist in the Satanic Panic. It was always around, but it hadn't reared its head the way it has like now. Like it's just I feel like we've gone back to 30 years, whatever it is from now to the 80s. We've reverted, and I didn't see that coming, and I wish it wasn't. It makes the film prescient, and I'm glad people have responded to it and be like, God, this is what I needed to see, this message of acceptance and working through this stuff. And I'm glad people have found something hopeful and something cathartic in it. But I couldn't have guessed that we would be back here the way that we are, and I wish we weren't. But I like to say I had that prescience and I had that vision, but I feel blindsided by this, I think, as most of us do, the what we're experiencing in culture right now.
I also don't want to disappoint you, but it's close to 40 years since the 80s. And I know.
Wait a second, I'm only 25.
I just celebrated my 40th birthday, so I was just inundated with 40th birthday stuff. So
boy,
I know.
That's the beauty of doing these like live videos where I have these like bright lights just shining on my bald head, and I'm like, we're talking about the 80s, and I'm like, oh god. It's funny.
Of hair.
Right. But like it's funny,
Sorry.
Michael, that you were saying that you hope that it gives people hope, or that like people have said that this movie gives them hope. And when Danny and I were talking about the finale of it, we were talking about how it kind of could seem like the two girls lose, right? Because essentially they are like walking around. I mean, here's spoilers, but they're in a gigantic labyrinth at the end of the movie. And I'm very much firm in the belief of like when someone puts their movie out, it's now up to the public to interpret what it is and like what the ending is, or to come up with their own ideas. But I was just wondering, going along with what you were saying before about kind of having these restrictions, the end of the movie, the credit sequence is like so ambitious, and like the the effects are just crazy for the end. Like, what is the story behind that ending? Did you guys always kind of have this idea of like, oh, let's have this crazy reveal at the end? I mean, like, what's up with the end?
No, there was none. None in the script. So like Brandon, our effects guy, we kicked around the idea of like that very notion, simply that like the labyrinth continues, like their goal is achieved. Like to me, Revealer is about, in many ways, a simple story about two different people who learn how to become friends, who say like, look, you need to get through your things, I need to get through mine, we need to get through our things together, but at the end of it, we can still be friends, we can still be different, but we can still work together, we can still help one another, and we can still be friends. And I mean, that's what I love, is these two women, and they hold hands at the end, and they're friends, and it's simple, Yeah. Now we still had the idea like, oh well, they're still in the labyrinth, there's still ways to go, and I think that's kind of been proven by Danny's question, like the cyclicalness of things. It's like you're never out of the labyrinth, we're never we're fighting fights. I mean, I feel like we're in reruns, like, and but like the story of that was like we had this kind of basic idea, and Brandon came on like later. I'm trying to remember the timeline of the post-production, but he came on later. He designed the snakes. First the snakes were practical, and he was like, let me see what I can do to kind of fiddle with this. And he like made these digital snakes that were just amazing. And they're what you see in the movie. Like he did that. And we were like, yeah, that'll do. And then he kind of caught wind, however, of like the idea for the ending, like thematically what we were saying and what our ideas were. And he was like, do you mind if I kind of fiddle with something? Do you mind if I try something out? And Luke and I were like, yeah, man, if you feel like, if you're so inclined. And like so many of us at that time, he's like, everything's slow, I don't have a lot of work, I've got time. And he's immensely talented, and he's kind of hungry. He's a younger guy looking to make his stamp on things. And we're like, yeah, man, go ahead. Like we're if we like it, and if it works, yeah, we'd be thrilled to use it. And he turned in not quite what you see at the end, but pretty close. And we're like, this is you fiddling. And like and we were like, this is perfect. Like it just closes the movie in a way that even from the writing and directing and all these perspectives, like that we hadn't even envisioned. We were like, and that's why, I mean, film is a great collaborative medium, and what he brought to it is like, I don't know how that movie really exists without that ending and what he did, and it's so amazing, and I'm so glad it exists. But yeah, that's really him, and really kind of what he took from the movie and from our little bits of like inclinations of our thoughts about it, and he took it and he went, and boy did he.
Yeah, well, like the end, it's kind of funny because there's that gigantic, like, kind of black hole image that's like
right
in the very center of that labyrinth, and that kind of reminds me of the anomaly that's in Roche Limit too. That, and I was wondering if like, was he kind of inspired by you, or is that like he just kind of pulled out of his imagination, or like did you kind of suggest that black hole image? Because that's really awesome.
It's funny because that's how Luke and I kind of got, brought together, because he was a big Roche Limit fan. We met somewhere along those lines, and that kind of kickstarted our friendship. He was friends with Tim first, and we both kind of were like, whoa, that's kind of like that. We both pointed it out, and it's like something I made, and like it was a big part of like Roche Limit is something I love, and he does too, and it had nothing to do. It was just total coincidence of unless Brandon knows the book, which I'm not sure. But he sure didn't mention it to us, and that's just like his his thing that he pulled that just happens to be very, very close to Roche Limit, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that was awesome. You know, I saw that.
It reminded me, and of in Hellraiser 2. It reminded me of Leviathan and like what hell looked like in Hellraiser 2 when they're with like instead of the black, like the circle in the middle, it's like the giant pyramid of like the inverse of the. So I was like, oh, that looks awesome. I love like you see other characters like walking through other parts of the labyrinth.
Yeah.
Yeah, really cool.
What's so funny? That's was on our mind a lot, and that's Luke's favorite movie is Hellraiser, the first one. He loves 2 as well, but that's his favorite movie. Yeah. Okay. So that you're perfect.
You know, it's funny, right? Because this kind of leads into my next question too. The band Gunship, there's 2 songs from them in the movie, right? And there's one at the very beginning. It's so funny. I write down the names of the character. Angie's the stripper, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Angie and Sally, right? But when Angie's in her peep show booth and she's stripping, there's that one Gunship song that I love so much, and then there's the one that's in the end credits too. And you know, I only listen to them via YouTube, but they're one of my favorite bands, and so you'll have the image on the screen, and it could be an album, it could just be some fan-made art, but there is a picture that looks like that black hole too for a Gunship video, and I was wondering if maybe that might have been an influence too.
You know what? I think that might actually be it. I think you're like ringing a bell. That might actually be what brought that on. I feel like that's actually right if I'm remembering correctly now. There's a good chance you're right. You might know more on this than me.
No, but you know what? Like Gunship, that's such a brilliant fucking idea for a soundtrack. Like to have them for this movie that's an 80s movie. You got this retro feel. They are kind of like an 80s kind of synth sounding band. Like, was that y'all's idea? Was that the director's idea to have like 2 of their songs in the soundtrack?
Yeah, I mean we're all fans, Luke and Tim especially, and I think like it was weird because one of our big things, like everybody goes to the 80s, well, and we get it, we know everyone's doing it, it's kind of tired, and that was definitely on our mind, we know, like, and people have told us, we're like, oh, another 80s thing, we're like, I know. But part of what we want to do is like, how do we not just be like, because we could have just dropped a Def Leppard song or a Crew song or whatever, but we don't want it to be like, because I feel like that's just not. It's like, hey, that's the one thing I love Stranger Things. That's one thing that drives me nuts about Stranger Things. It's like too many songs. We're like, we get it. It's the 80s.
Yep.
And we don't want to do that. We want to be like, because it's true. It's just like poking you in the ribs. Like, hey, the 80s, am I right? And we're like, well, how do we make it feel like the 80s? Like in our heads, like what we remember. And like, the song that when Angie's walking up the very beginning of the movie to the phone booth that plays through while she's going into the peep show, is called Saint and Sinner, and that sounds like a glam hair metal song to a T. It's not. That was recorded for Revealer. That's a brand new song that we're like, hey, here's the thing that we want.
That's cool.
Can you do it? So we're trying to do like, I don't know, like capture it less than pull from it. And Gunship does that so well. And I feel like it captured the seediness, the skeezy, not just of a peep show, but the 80s. The 80s were skeezy. Like we look back in the 80s. The 80s were kind of dirty just in general. Like I miss them. I love them, but they just had like a kind of overall gloss of yuck on them, and I grew up in the city, so I'm like, I was especially like attuned to like how the 80s felt, and Gunship kind of does that so well, and the 2 songs were perfect, and we were lucky. We were like, Luke was like, Gunship would be perfect. He picked that song, and in our minds we were like, there's no way though, like there's no way that this is going to happen. And sure enough, we sent it to them, and they're like, we love this movie. Yes.
Awesome.
We actually went for one song. They're like, you want to use this one too? And we're like, sure, like why not? And so they're very generous, super cool to work with. They're awesome. And there's a few things that happen like this with the making this movie that we just got lucky. We just got really lucky.
Awesome.
speaking of the 80s and Stranger Things, you done a comic. I'm going to get the title wrong because it's probably a Russian word. Kamchatka?
That's how I say it.
Okay.
Let me say that for sure, too. Yeah.
And it focuses on the Russian prison where Hopper is. Have you finished season 4 now?
It's weird. So I read it like 2 years ago, because when I this series was really delayed. So I had done like a issue, I did the Free Comic Book Day issue, and I'd done the series, but I think the series came before both. I can't quite remember, but it was delayed for a long time because they're trying to align it with season 4, which we did now, So at the time they were like, oh, we want to do a comic that has to tie into season 4. I got all the scripts. I was kind of bummed because I'm such a Stranger Things fan. I didn't want to read it and be spoiled.
Yeah.
But I did. I read them like 2 years ago. So I've known. I'm not finished watching it. But it's really, those scripts are, I thought, like, because so much time had passed and then they stopped shooting because of COVID and they went back. I was like, well, I bet things will change. But so far, the scripts are really, really, really what they made. So I was kind of bummed. But then it turns out I didn't even have to read the scripts. That the comic has nothing to do with it.
All right, that was kind of like where I was going. Where like how like did the series, did anything that happens in the Russian prison correlate to what you wrote or any of your comic? But
no, well, originally my original pitch was an Eddie series. Like I really wanted to. I read it, I was like, oh, this is the star of this season. Yeah. I have to do an Eddie. And they were like, nope. And they were like, a matter of fact, forget everything we said. Forget you read the scripts. Just go do something else. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was kind of glad for that, because I was like, you know what? How do you do? I feel like putting the kids in more adventures is like, how many adventures can these kids get into? Like what else can we're already kind of stretching believability. Right. So it's like, how do we take this completely somewhere else with different characters, and let's just get out of Hawkins. Let's get away from these kids. And that's why I was like, well, this Russia thing. And granted, it's cool to know what happens with Hopper and stuff like that. But like, spoiler if anybody hasn't read it, I mean, Hopper's not in the series that I did. I mean, it's at the prison, but that's about it. Right. So it's kind of nice to be like a spin-off, almost like a step removed, which has also helped me out a lot, because it also like made it so much easier for Netflix to approve stuff, because that didn't step on anything. It was totally out of the way of everything that was happening.
Yeah. Well, so that brings me to another question then. Danny, this isn't in our notes, that I'm actually going to substitute this question for my question number 10. But like, that reminds me that like you also have like written Star Wars comic books, right? And like a whole bunch of different like tie-in media to things. And so that must be so friggin' exciting to have access to scripts and stuff for something that like everyone is talking about Stranger Things right now, right? And it's like, it's the big thing. And you knew about it like in advance so you could write this story. Does that happen with Star Wars too for you?
Oh, no, no, they don't share anything.
Oh. Okay, no.
It's almost frustrating, because sometimes they're like, give you an assignment. They're like, guess what's happening? And you're like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in Last Jedi. I wish you'd just tell me, But I mean, it's still cool. I mean, it's still like, it's a thrill. It's funny. I always kind of consider myself in this weird way, as much as I kind of like sci-fi. I have like my sci-fi things that I love. Like Roche Limit is like my ode to Blade Runner. It's my ode to Ridley Scott, basically. Ridley Scott's one of my favorite filmmakers in general. Like, he's so diverse. He does so many different things and does them well. And he's made classic after classic. But I always think of myself kind of like the horror guy who just loves Star Wars as well. So I've been lucky to write a lot of Star Wars. I still am working in the Star Wars world, which is cool, and I love it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool. Like, you get to be. There are times when you get to kind of be like, get the inside baseball stuff in a way, and you talk to other writers and they tell you what's going on here and there. So I guess I do know a little bit. Lucasfilm was very secretive, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I was kind of surprised that like Stranger Things gave me the scripts to the whole season. It's like, you don't even know me. I mean, I didn't do anything, but also, but at the same time, like it's exciting, but also like everybody has this excitement for Stranger Things right now, and we're all watching it and like experiencing it together. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I know where it's going. I'm watching it with my wife, and I'm like, there's really, I've forgotten some things because it has been a while, and my memory is very bad. So I've forgotten some things, but I'm also like, I know where it's going, and I don't mean that like as like to sound arrogant or something like that. I'm bummed. I'm like, yeah, this is gonna happen. I know, and I already know. And I'm like, I miss that newness of watching it and being surprised and having that experience that everyone else is having. So it kind of broke me a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you brought up your love for Star Wars, because like you can definitely feel it when you're reading Black Star Renegades. It reminds me of like Timothy Zahn's writing. I on your Goodreads profile it says that Timothy Zahn is like an influence to you too.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I'm eager to listen to the sequel. I listened to the audiobook of this, but I bought this at a bookstore.
Thank you.
Taylor, Texas. Yeah, it was cool. In this like little random bookstore in Taylor, Texas, they had both your books. I was like, I'm getting both those fucking things. Anyway, the question I have for that is, I felt like this could have easily been a comic as well, and it could have been a movie. Like it could have fit in either form, the way that you were telling the story. And as someone who writes, I'm always just very curious when it comes to people like you who write multiple mediums. Like, what's the chicken or the egg thing here? Are you like, I want to write a book and then you come up with it? Or is it like, oh, I have this idea, it'll work as a comic? Like, how do you determine what medium to write in?
Oh, well, this was kind of a simple one because the chicken and the egg here was that I was actually asked to write these as novels. And it's weird. I have written novels. I had written novels that were unpublished, and I had done it, so it's not like it was a whole brand new thing. But being candid, I would say it's my least favorite because it's the most hard. It's just the hardest. It's so hard to write a novel. Like I've thought about doing it again because I love books and I read, and I did enjoy the experience thoroughly. But I think back and I was like, oh man, that was real hard. That's real difficult. Yeah, so the publisher, St. Martin's, knew I was a big Star Wars fan. I was already writing Star Wars. I was a Star Wars in the bullpen, you could say. And they came to me and they're like, hey, we want to do Star Wars novels, but not Star Wars novels. What do you think? It was an editor I knew. I'd been pitching this editor named Mark, different stuff, not Star Wars stuff, just my own. They're actually mainly horror novels, and nothing ever clicked. And then he was like, hey, I got this kind of like, whatever, this desire from up top that we want to do. Star Wars is back. This is when the sequel movies were coming out. Star Wars is back. People love it. We want to do some Star Wars type books. And I thought you'd be good. And which was great. I was thrilled. I was thrilled to write these books. I love these books. It gave me the opportunity to do my own kind of Star Wars. If I did it over again, I don't know if I would hew so close. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I do wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm kind of okay with that, but yeah, in that instance, it started from me being specifically asked. But generally, it's hard to pin down why those decisions are made. I mean, usually, unfortunately, the reality is, and I think this kind of ties into what drove the novel. A lot of it's driven by what can get made. Like what can I do? Like if I want to tell a certain, like, let's say like a superhero book, it's really hard. Like, 'cause I'm like, where am I going to go with that? If I was especially moved to do that, it's like, where do I go like to do that? And just like, I don't have good, great relationships, not bad relationships, but I don't have any established relationship with DC or Marvel, especially I've been so long. So that's not really a place to go to there anyway. There's limited stuff from where I exist professionally. And if I think about like a movie, it's like, can this be done to scale? Can I write a $10 million movie? It's probably not the best idea, because I don't know how I can get that made, at least right now. I can try to do like the Blumhouse, 2 million, that's right. Possible. But like beyond that, I just don't know. So a lot of it is just like, unfortunately, it's where, you know, art collides with commerce and making those decisions of like, what can I do? What can I sell? What can I get paid for? Like what can get made, and I can see, the results of that. I wish I had more creative freedom, like, and I do to some degree, but a lot of those decisions, unfortunately, are just like, the nuts and bolts of the professional side of things.
I see. Yeah. Well, I listened to your interview with Jason Inman that you did a little while ago.
Oh yeah, yeah, great
Yeah,
guy.
and it's kind of funny because it's only like a half hour, and then he's like, "Oh, if you want to hear the whole thing, you got to go to my Patreon." I was like, "Oh man," but because it was really getting juicy, But in that interview, the part that I did get, it said that you write 8 hours a day, and it's it sounds like you treat it like a regular day job that you go
Mhm.
to, and I know that like as a writer, you essentially have to like get your routine established. You have to like work those muscles. You have to like get it to where you're doing it all the time. It sounds like you started out writing screenplays or trying to make movies to begin with. Is that where you kind of built in your writing routine, like working on screenplays, or did you do prose first? Like, how did you kind of get your writing muscle built up?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was always doing something. So yeah, it was initially screenplay. I mean, I wrote my first screenplay when I was 14. So I mean, I didn't have nearly anything resembling a routine. I was a 14-year-old. So, but I've just always been writing, and then I think the routine really hit me when I've always been disciplined in writing, but I think when I really, really buckled down and really, really got going is when I started to get more opportunities to write. It's kind of, again, to use that phrase, chicken and the egg, like, it's like, do you get more opportunities when you write more, or do you write more because you get more opportunities? Like, because
Mhm.
it encourages you to do more, because it's hard. When I was not getting published, it's hard to find a reason to do it. Like, there's only so much motivation you can pull out of yourself, and so much inspiration and all those kind of things. But once I started getting on the track of like, oh, I'm getting stuff out, Hoax Hunters was being published with Image, and then which led to Roche Limit. And I was still working, I still had a day job through all of those things. I was still working a 9 to 5, but I would come home, and I had kids, and I'd come home, I'd do my 9 to 5, I'd spend my time with my kids. They were very young at that time. In fact, I probably only had one through part of this, but like, they would go to sleep, and then I'd write for like 3 to 4 hours a night, especially when Roche Limit got done, because I was like having real deadlines and a real thing. So I was just going for hours and hours and hours, and that's all I did. And that kind of, it became actually easier when I left, because all of a sudden I didn't have to do nights. I still do once in a while, just out of necessity. But like, the routine, it helped when I had real deadlines. Deadlines keep me going. I like a good schedule. I like a good knowing what I'm doing, knowing when I'm doing it. So that really keeps me on point. I'm doing this, then I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I have to get here and I have to get there. But I think prior to that, it was just always at least somewhat a routine. Maybe not as rigorous and maybe not as strict, but it was always like, I'm writing something. Even before Roche Limit and Hoax Hunters, like, there was something, this nucleus that I had, that like was my writing core, and I am writing this, whether it was a book or a screenplay or even a comic. Like, this is a thing I'm working on, and I'm gonna chip away at it. And I always did chip away at it, even before anybody cared or was asking me to chip away on anything.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because you do write in so many different genres, and it definitely feels like your work is like in different worlds. Like, some authors have like a shared universe of their own stuff. Like, Stephen King is like the obvious
Right.
example, right? But as I've been looking over your stuff, it does feel very different. You said that Roche Limit was sort of like your ode to, Ridley Scott. That makes a lot of sense. And then Black Star Renegades feels like it's for like a younger audience than Roche Limit. And then Barbaric is this totally different thing. Revealer's its own different thing, right? And then there's so many other books too. But one thing that I've noticed, just kind of going through your stuff more recently, is that a lot of your characters kind of say this line along the lines of, everyone has been telling me my whole life that I am doing everything wrong, right? Like Soren, the necromancer in Barbaric, says that. Angie says that in Revealer. Cade Sura in Black Star Renegades kind of, I think he doesn't outright say it, but like he's thinking that. Like, is that like a theme that you try to put into your work? Is that like a personal feeling that you kind of are rebelling against?
Wow, that's interesting. I guess I didn't notice, but I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. And yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think like, I lived my whole life, like feeling like, an outcast, like we know, like yeah, we're old enough to know, like we grew up in a time when the things that we love weren't really accepted, like it was like, put that comic down, stop watching the movie, stop caring so much about these things, stop caring about science fiction, stop giving a shit about horror, whatever, and go after real pursuits. Even when I was in college, I couldn't write genre. It was literally forbidden. I mean, it's like it made me. I just never knew my place. Like I said, like I was athletic, but I had no friends really who played sports. Like I just was always on the outside of stuff, and the stuff that I truly love were told weren't worthwhile pursuits. Writing wasn't a worthwhile pursuit. Like, what are you going to do with that? How can you make a living? How can you provide for yourself or anybody else? So, I mean, I always kind of like experienced that and just felt like apart from stuff. And, like you can say that's sort of superficial, but I don't feel like it is. It's who I am, and who I am was told was like, don't do those things, don't love horror, don't put too much stock in comics, don't bother with writing, like do something else and enjoy something else. And it's like, well, that's me though. You're telling me not to be me and not to love myself, which is a very dangerous thing to tell people, especially young people, so yeah, I mean, I think it is coded into who I am and how I grew up. I mean, granted, I have a very supportive family. Don't want to take anything away. I have great parents who helped, who supported me, who were like, like I said, my dad was into the same things, but there was always a sense that they didn't get it. And especially like extending that out beyond my parents to friends or teachers or people in my community. Like there's nobody. It's weird. I hear stories about people who are like filmmakers who are like, oh, well, my dad was into filmmaking or my neighbor, blah, 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 blah. Like I didn't have any of that ever. Like nobody. Like there is no like person I can point to. It's like, oh, well, this person, I saw how they made it as a writer. I saw how they made it as a director and they gave me tips. And I was like, they were like my mentor. I didn't have that person. Like, I mean, granted, I've had it now as I've gotten older, people I look up to and friends that I've made, and I've gotten good relationships. But like when I was a kid and a teenager, even in college, that did not exist.
Right. Yeah.
That really just made me think about the interaction of the two girls in Revealer. Like, especially even like Sally, who says that she's like, she doesn't even know why she started protesting. She's just out there, and nobody would accept her for what she is. And, I feel like, yeah, like there's a reason why horror is the only genre that, like, horror and sci-fi are the only genres that have like fan conventions, because nobody's going to a comedy movie convention or a drama convention, but like we go, like I've taken my 11-year-old daughter to horror movie conventions, and like she knows that she's not alone, but like sometimes she goes to school and she's like, her friends are like, did you watch, I don't know, whatever shows they watch, and she's like, no, my dad and I watched The Exorcist last night. I'm like, so I get it.
Yeah, we're all looking for acceptance. We all want to feel like part of the community. It's a natural, that's evolutionary instinct. Is like survival is in groups. Like that is who we are, is to seek out people who share the same goals. Granted, it's not food and shelter and warmth the way it was however many years ago, but there's still like necessities of like who you are and how you feel about things, and you want to share who you are and have that back. And I think it's important. It's important in life. It's important who we are. It's important to foster that. It's important for people to feel like they can be creative, in the sense, like maybe not necessarily that you have to create something specifically, but you create something within yourself and you're able to feel good about it. And and then share that. And that's a really important thing for life, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, like, you know, I'm almost 40, maybe 40, like in 2 months, right? And pretty much everyone I interact with in person doesn't have any kind of interest like this, has no interest in writing. You know, they like horror, they like sci-fi and stuff, but like not the way that like I do. And, you know, the way Danny is about horror. And that's why Danny and I do this show, I think, so that he and I can talk about this stuff. He lives in New York. I live in Texas. And then that's why I am so, so excited to talk to people like you, because like you're like living the dream, man. You're like doing what I would love to be doing. And so, you know, we're just like so grateful that you came on the show and you talked with us. And I'm hoping that if you ever want to come back, you know, if another movie comes out, if there's some more horror content that you're putting out there, like if you want to come back on the show, we'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. And this was great. I mean, this is a blast. I'd love to come on. Hopefully, we are talking about another movie. That'd be a win for us all.
Yeah. So with that being said, like, is there anything right now that like if people are getting into your work right now, if like this video introduced them to it, or people that know you, but like you want to tell them about what's coming out soon, is there anything that you could plug right now at the end of the video?
Well, like you mentioned, you know, Revealer, it's on Shudder. It's exclusively on Shudder for now. Eventually, so they have an exclusivity window, which I forget. I think the fall sometime. Then it'll start popping up on VOD, you know, Apple, Amazon, etc. It'll be on Blu-ray shortly after that. I think the end of the year, beginning of next. So yeah, I mean, Revealer is such a big one, and Barbaric, we mentioned that, like the new volume, which is, I think anyone can pick up and read. It's not a very complicated book, and it's designed to be. It's just a fun inversion of sword and sorcery fantasy stuff. It's a book that I love, that I'm so glad to see has found a really cool, really great audience. And yeah, I think that's about it. There's a Revealer comic coming out through Vault, which is pretty exciting in August. And I think it's a great way to kind of like get a sense of what Revealer is, if anyone's on the fence, or get a little bit more of that universe. It's like universe building, universe adjacent stories. So yeah, I mean, that's really what I've got going on at the moment. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we had a really great time talking to you, Michael, and we hope to talk to you real soon then.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you guys. Thanks for taking the time. This is great. I loved it.
Man, this was great.
Nice.